January 23, 1940. Bletchley Park, England. Alan Turing sat at his desk in HUD 8s, surrounded by papers covered with mathematical notation. Outside, the winter cold seeped through the thin walls of the temporary wooden building. Inside, Turing was wrestling with what seemed like an impossible problem: how to break the German Enigma cipher machine when the possible number of settings exceeded 150 million. The Enigma machine was elegant in its simplicity. 3 rotors, each with 26 positions, created a polyalphabetic substitution cipher that changed with every letter typed. A plugboard added another layer of complexity. The machine was portable, reliable, and seemingly unbreakable. German military commanders trusted it completely, sending their most secret communications through Enigma encrypted messages. Turing understood that human minds couldn't search through 150 million possible settings to find the correct one. Even if a cryptanalyst could test 1 setting per second, it would take longer than the age of the universe to try them all. The problem required a different approach. It required machines that could test thousands of settings per hour, eliminating impossible combinations and narrowing the search space to something manageable. What Turing and his colleagues at Bletchley Park would create over the next few years represented a revolution in cryptanalysis and computing. They would build machines that could think faster than humans, process information in ways that anticipated modern computers, and break codes that the Germans believed were mathematically unbreakable. The story of how British codebreakers built machines that outsmarted Enigma is a story of mathematics meeting engineering, of theoretical insight enabling practical achievement, and of how a small group of brilliant individuals changed the course of World War II. The Enigma machine wasn't a German invention. It was developed in the early 1920s by a German engineer named Arthur Scherbius as a commercial encryption device for banks and businesses. The machine was elegantly simple in concept: electrical circuits running through rotating wheels that scrambled letters according to complex patterns. The basic Enigma consisted of a keyboard, a lamboard, and 3 rotors positioned between them. When an operator pressed a key, electrical current flowed through the rotors, each of which substituted 1 letter for another according to its internal wiring. The rotors advanced with each key press, changing the substitution pattern continuously. The current then passed through a reflector that sent it back through the rotors via a different path before illuminating a lamp on the lamboard, showing the encrypted letter. The genius of the design was that the encryption was reciprocal. If pressing A produced Q, then pressing Q would produce A. This meant the same machine could be used for both encryption and decryption simply by typing in the encrypted message. The recipient needed only to configure their Enigma identically to the sender's machine to recover the original message. The German military adopted Enigma in the late 1920s and progressively improved it. They added a plugboard that performed an additional letter substitution before the signal entered the rotors. They increased the number of available rotors from 3 to 5, with operators selecting 3 for use in any given message. These modifications enormously increased the number of possible settings. By 1939, military Enigma's complexity was staggering. The 3 rotors could be selected from a set of 5 and arranged in any order, giving 60 possible rotor combinations. Each rotor had 26 possible starting positions, giving 17,576 rotor position combinations. The plugboard could connect up to 10 pairs of letters, with the number of possible plugboard configurations exceeding 150 billion. The total key space was approximately 158 million possible initial settings. German cryptographers were confident this key space made Enigma unbreakable. Even if an enemy captured an Enigma machine and understood its operation, they couldn't read messages without knowing the specific settings used. Those settings changed daily according to codebooks distributed monthly to all Enigma users. Without the codebooks, messages encrypted with Enigma should be secure against any conceivable cryptanalysis. The confidence wasn't entirely unjustified. Traditional cryptanalysis techniques relied on identifying patterns in encrypted text through frequency analysis or known plaintext attacks. Enigma's rotating wheels ensured that no letter was ever encrypted the same way twice in a message. Statistical patterns that betrayed simpler ciphers were absent from Enigma traffic. The encryption was mathematically sophisticated in ways that defeated conventional cryptanalytic approaches. But Enigma had weaknesses that its designers hadn't fully appreciated. The reciprocal nature of the encryption meant that no letter could ever encrypt to itself. If the plaintext contained an A, the ciphertext in that position could be any letter except A. This seemingly minor limitation would prove to be a critical vulnerability that British cryptanalysts would exploit. The plugboard introduced another weakness. While it dramatically increased the key space, it also created patterns that could be detected through careful analysis. The plugboard connections were symmetrical. If A was plugged to Q, then Q was plugged to A. This symmetry reduced the effective complexity and provided attack opportunities for cryptanalysts who understood how to exploit it. German operational procedures added further vulnerabilities. Many messages began with stereotyped phrases. Weather reports started with weather, weather. Military reports often began with ranks and unit designations, and many messages included predictable elements like dates and times. These cribs known or guessed pieces of plaintext provided cryptanalysts with starting points for attacks. The daily key change procedure was another operational vulnerability. All Enigma users on a particular network used the same daily settings specified in codebooks. This meant that if cryptanalysts broke the settings for one message, they could read all messages sent that day on that network. The volume of traffic using identical settings provided statistical patterns that could be analyzed. The story of breaking Enigma doesn't begin at Bletchley Park. It begins in Poland in the early 1930s, where Polish mathematicians made the first crucial breakthroughs against Enigma. Their work would provide the foundation for all subsequent Allied success against the cipher. The Polish Cipher Bureau recruited mathematicians rather than linguists for cryptanalysis work. This unconventional choice reflected an understanding that modern cipher machines created mathematical rather than linguistic puzzles. In 1932, they recruited Marian Rejewski, a 27-year-old mathematician with no cryptanalysis experience but strong analytical skills. Rejewski was given captured Enigma intercepts and asked to find patterns. He approached the problem mathematically, representing Enigma's operation as a permutation that could be expressed algebraically. Through brilliant mathematical reasoning and some helpful intelligence about commercial Enigma machines, Rejewski reconstructed Enigma's internal wiring without ever seeing a military version of the machine. By 1933, Rejewski could read some German Enigma messages. The Polish success was remarkable but limited. As the Germans added complexity to Enigma, particularly through the plugboard modifications, the Poles had to develop new techniques. Rejewski invented a device called a cyclometer that could determine rotor positions through mathematical analysis of message patterns. The Poles also developed the bomba cryptologiczna, an electromechanical machine that could test rotor positions much faster than human cryptanalysts. The bomba used 6 Enigma machines wired together to test all possible rotor positions for a given set of rotor orders. It was the first machine designed specifically to break Enigma and establish the principle that machines were necessary to defeat machine ciphers. By 1938, the Polish Cipher Bureau could break most German Enigma messages with reasonable speed. But German security improvements were making the task progressively harder. The introduction of 2 additional rotors in December 1938 increased the complexity beyond what Polish resources could handle. They would need to build many more bombas to cope with the increased key space, and Poland lacked the industrial capacity to manufacture them. In July 1939, with war clearly approaching, Polish intelligence made the fateful decision to share their Enigma breakthroughs with Britain and France. Polish cryptanalysts met with their British and French counterparts outside Warsaw and revealed everything: the reconstructed wiring, the cryptanalytic techniques, the bomba machines. They even provided replica Enigma machines they had constructed based on their cryptanalytic insights. The gift was extraordinary. The Poles were giving away years of cryptanalytic research and mathematical breakthroughs that represented an enormous intelligence advantage. But they understood that Poland would likely be overrun by German invasion and that their work would be lost, unless it was shared with allies who had the resources to continue it. The British representatives at the Warsaw meeting were astounded. British cryptanalysts had been working on Enigma for years with minimal success. The Polish achievements seemed almost impossible. Yet here was complete documentation of how to break the cipher, validated by Polish success in reading German messages currently. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, the Polish Cipher Bureau evacuated to France, taking their cryptanalytic expertise with them. Some Polish cryptanalysts continued working on Enigma from France and later from Britain. Their contributions to Allied cryptanalysis extended beyond the initial knowledge transfer, though their pioneering role was deliberately obscured by British secrecy that lasted decades after the war. The Government Code and Cipher School, Britain's cryptanalysis organization, had been located in London but was evacuated to Bletchley Park in 1939 to avoid bombing. Bletchley Park was a Victorian mansion about 50 miles north of London with grounds large enough to accommodate the expansion that would come. The estate was selected for practical reasons. It was far enough from London to be relatively safe from bombing, but close enough for communication with government ministries. It had good rail connections. The grounds could accommodate temporary buildings. It was unremarkable enough that the activity there wouldn't attract attention. The mansion itself became administrative headquarters while wooden huts scattered across the grounds housed the cryptanalysis teams. The recruitment for Bletchley Park was unlike anything in military or intelligence history. The organization needed mathematicians, linguists, chess champions, crossword experts, anyone with unusual mental abilities who could tackle the cryptanalytic challenges. Recruitment was done quietly through academic networks, with professors identifying brilliant students who might contribute. Alan Turing arrived at Bletchley Park in September 1939, just days after war broke out. Turing was already recognized as a brilliant mathematician. His 1936 paper on computable numbers had laid theoretical foundations for what would become computer science. He had conceptualized a theoretical universal machine that could perform any calculation, that could be defined algorithmically. Now he would apply those insights to the practical problem of breaking Enigma. Turing was assigned to Hut 8, which focused on German naval Enigma. Naval messages used a more complex version of Enigma with additional security measures. Breaking naval Enigma was considered the highest priority because German U-boats were devastating Allied shipping. If convoy routes could be read from decrypted German naval signals, countless ships and lives could be saved. The atmosphere at Bletchley Park was unusual. Military discipline was minimal. People worked when inspiration struck, sometimes all night, then slept during the day. Dress codes were ignored. Turing was famous for chaining his coffee mug to a radiator and wearing his gas mask while cycling to ward off hay fever. The eccentricity was tolerated because results mattered more than conformity. The organizational structure evolved organically. Different huts handled different tasks. Hut 6 worked on German Army and Air Force Enigma. Hut 8 handled naval Enigma. Hut 3 analyzed and translated decrypted Army and Air Force messages. Hut 4 did the same for naval messages. Other huts handled different ciphers, traffic analysis, and administrative functions. The structure was informal but effective. Gordon Welchman, a mathematician from Cambridge, made crucial organizational contributions. He recognized that cryptanalysis and intelligence analysis needed to be closely integrated. Breaking the cipher was useless if the resulting intelligence wasn't properly analyzed and disseminated. Welchman developed systems for rapid processing of decrypted messages and efficient distribution of intelligence to military commanders. The work was intensely pressured. German key settings changed daily at midnight. Each day's messages had to be broken before they became irrelevant. The cryptanalysts raced against time, knowing that convoy routing decisions depended on reading U-boat signals before the convoys sailed into ambushes. Lives depended on success, and everyone felt that weight. Women comprised the majority of Bletchley Park's workforce, while the senior cryptanalysts were mostly men. Reflecting the gender discrimination of the era, women operated the machines, performed much of the routine cryptanalysis, handled translations, and managed the administrative infrastructure. Many were highly educated and made significant contributions that went unrecognized for decades due to both secrecy and sexism. The secrecy was absolute. Workers were told only what they needed to know for their specific tasks. People in one hut often didn't know what people in other huts were doing. No one discussed their work outside the park, not with family, not with friends, not with anyone. The penalty for security breaches was severe. The culture of secrecy was so effective that many Bletchley Park veterans never told their families what they did during the war, taking their secrets to their graves. Turing's great contribution to breaking Enigma was a machine he called the bomb, inspired by the Polish bomba, but substantially more sophisticated. The bomb was an electromechanical device designed to determine, Enigma settings through logical deduction rather than exhaustive search. The bomb exploited the mathematical properties of Enigma encryption and the operational procedures Germans used. Turing realized that if cryptanalysts possessed a crib, a piece of known or guessed plaintext, matched with its ciphertext, the bomb could test rotor positions to find which settings would produce that encryption pattern. The key insight was that Enigma's reciprocal nature and the impossibility of a letter encrypting to itself created logical contradictions that could be detected mechanically. The bomb would assume a rotor setting, trace the logical implications through the crib, and determine whether contradictions arose. Settings that produced contradictions could be eliminated. Settings that remained consistent were candidates for the correct setting. The first bomb, called Victory, was installed at Bletchley Park in March 1940. It consisted of 36 Enigma equivalents, rotating drums with electrical contacts that simulated Enigma rotors. The drums rotated at high speed, testing thousands of rotor positions per hour. When the bomb detected a possible setting, it stopped, and cryptanalysts manually checked whether the setting actually decrypted the message successfully. The bomb was large, about 7 feet tall, and weighing over a ton. It made a distinctive clicking sound as the drums rotated, leading to the name that suggested ticking time bombs. Operating the bombs required careful setup, with operators configuring the machine according to menus prepared by cryptanalysts based on cribs. Early bomb runs took hours and often failed to find the correct settings. The technology was temperamental. Electrical contacts wore out, drums didn't always rotate precisely. The operators, mostly Women's Royal Naval Service, WRNS, members called Wrens, had to learn intricate procedures for setting up and operating these complex machines. The margin for error was minimal. Gordon Welchman made a crucial improvement to Turing's design by adding a diagonal board that exploited the plugboard's reciprocal connections. The diagonal board dramatically improved the bomb's efficiency by eliminating many false positives. With Welchman's enhancement, bombs could find correct settings much faster and with greater reliability. Production of bombs accelerated through 1940 and 1941. Building them required precision engineering at a scale that pushed British manufacturing capabilities. The drums had to be manufactured to exact tolerances. The electrical contacts needed consistent resistance. The control systems had to operate reliably despite mechanical complexity. Each bomb took months to build and required constant maintenance to keep operational. By 1942, Bletchley Park was receiving decrypted German messages daily through bomb operations. The intelligence, codenamed Ultra, was transforming Allied understanding of German military operations, but the bombs were expensive and slow. Each machine cost approximately £6,500, equivalent to millions in modern currency. Running them consumed enormous amounts of electricity. Operators had to be trained. Maintenance was constant. The bombs weren't computers in the modern sense. They didn't process general algorithms or store programs. They were special-purpose machines designed to solve one specific problem, testing Enigma settings against cribs. But they embodied computational principles that would influence actual computer development. They demonstrated that machines could perform logical operations at speeds impossible for humans. The scale of bomb operations eventually became enormous. By the end of the war, over 200 bombs were in operation, distributed across multiple sites to reduce vulnerability to bombing. They processed hundreds of messages daily, breaking keys for different Enigma networks and enabling intelligence collection across all theaters of war. The industrial scale of machine cryptanalysis was unprecedented and wouldn't be matched until the computer era. The bombs required cribs to function. Finding good cribs became an art that combined linguistic analysis, intelligence insight, and psychological understanding of German operators. Cribs weren't always obvious, and identifying them required creativity and deep knowledge of German military procedures. Weather reports were among the most reliable cribs. German weather stations sent encrypted reports at predictable times in predictable formats. British cryptanalysts knew these messages began with wetter or wettervorsage, weather forecast. They knew the reports included location identifiers and meteorological terminology. This knowledge provided cribs that could be used to break the day's keys. Another productive source of cribs came from German operational patterns. Many German units sent situation reports at the same time each day using similar phrasing. Headquarters messages often contained formal salutations and closing phrases. These stereotyped communications provided cribs that cryptanalysts learned to recognize and exploit. The Germans occasionally made operational security mistakes that provided cribs. Some operators were lazy and used weak procedures. They might start multiple messages with identical phrases. They might use predictable message formats. Some used their girlfriends' names as message settings, creating vulnerabilities cryptanalysts could exploit if they learned personal details about German operators. One famous crib technique involved sending misinformation that Germans would be forced to report. British intelligence would plant false information suggesting an event or situation at a specific location. When Germans reported on that event, their encrypted messages would contain predictable phrases that British cryptanalysts could use as cribs. This marriage of cryptanalysis and deception operations represented sophisticated intelligence work. Bletchley Park developed elaborate procedures for collecting potential cribs from multiple sources. Intelligence analysts studied German military organization to understand reporting requirements. Linguists analyzed German military language to identify common phrases. Radio operators listened for transmission patterns that suggested message types. All this information fed into the cryptanalytic process. The crib identification process required coordination across multiple Bletchley Park sections. HUT 8 and HUT 6 cryptanalysts identified potential cribs. HUT 3 and HUT 4 intelligence analysts provided context about German operations that suggested message content. The intercept stations collected the actual encrypted messages. The machine operators configured bombs according to the cribs and ran them to find settings. Sometimes cribs came from captured documents. When Allied forces captured German positions, intelligence officers searched for Enigma materials. Code books, key sheets, and operator logs provided invaluable information. Even partial documents could give clues about key settings or operational procedures. Coordinating battlefield captures with cryptanalytic exploitation required communication systems that could get captured materials to Bletchley Park within hours. Re-encipherments provided another source of cribs. Sometimes Germans sent the same message on multiple networks using different keys. If cryptanalysts had already broken one key, they could use the decrypted message as a crib for the other key. The Germans' practice of repeating important messages across networks, intended to ensure reception, actually gave British cryptanalysts multiple opportunities to break each key. The crib techniques evolved as Germans improved their security. When Germans recognized a vulnerability, they changed procedures to eliminate it. British cryptanalysts had to continuously develop new crib identification methods. The cat-and-mouse game between British cryptanalysts and German security officers continued throughout the war, with each side adapting to the other's moves. While Enigma was the most widely used German cipher machine, it wasn't the only one. For the highest-level communications between Hitler and his army group commanders, the Germans used the Lawrence SC 4042 teleprinter cipher machine, codenamed Tunny by the British. Breaking Tunny would require machines even more advanced than the bombs. The Lawrence cipher was more complex than Enigma. It used 12 wheels rather than Enigma's 3 rotors, and it encrypted teleprinter characters rather than individual letters. The mathematical complexity exceeded Enigma by orders of magnitude. Traditional cryptanalysis seemed hopeless against Tunny. Breaking it would require new mathematical techniques and machines of unprecedented sophistication. Bill Toot, a chemist working at Bletchley Park, achieved a breakthrough in 1942 when he reverse-engineered the Lawrence machine's logical structure from encrypted messages alone, without ever seeing the actual machine. This was a cryptanalytic achievement of extraordinary brilliance. Toot's work provided the theoretical foundation for attacking Tunny, but exploiting his insights would require machine assistance. Max Neumann, a Cambridge mathematics professor working at Bletchley Park, proposed building a machine that could test Tunny wheel patterns automatically. Neumann's machine would need to process data at speeds far exceeding the bomb's. It would need to count patterns in the encrypted text and perform statistical analyses that would reveal wheel settings. The machine Neumann envisioned was, in essence, a programmable computer. Tommy Flowers, an engineer at the Post Office Research Station, took on the challenge of building Neumann's machine. Flowers proposed using vacuum tubes radio valves rather than electromechanical relays. Vacuum tubes were faster but also more temperamental. Many engineers doubted that a machine using hundreds of vacuum tubes could be reliable enough for cryptanalytic work. Flowers persevered, and in December 1943, the first Colossus machine was delivered to Bletchley Park. Colossus used 1,500 vacuum tubes and could process 5,000 characters per second, far faster than any existing machine. It was programmable through switches and plugboards, allowing operators to configure it for different cryptanalytic tasks. It was arguably the world's first programmable electronic digital computer. Colossus didn't look like a modern computer. It was enormous, filling a room, consuming massive amounts of electricity, and generating enough heat that operators sometimes worked in minimal clothing. Punched paper tape fed data into the machine. The tubes glowed and the machine hummed. Results were output on electric typewriters or displayed on indicator lights. Operating Colossus required skill and understanding of both the mathematics and the engineering. The success of the first Colossus led to rapid production of improved versions. Colossus Mark II, operational in June 1944, used 2,400 vacuum tubes and processed data 5 times faster than Mark I. By war's end, 10 Colossus machines were operating at Bletchley Park, breaking tiny messages that contained the German High Command's most secret communications. The intelligence from Colossus operations was extraordinarily valuable. Tani carried strategic communications, Hitler's directives to field commanders, situation reports from Army Group headquarters, planning for major operations. Decrypting these messages gave Allied commanders insight into German strategic thinking at the highest levels. The contribution to Allied success was substantial, though the details remained classified for decades after the war. Colossus represented a technological leap beyond the bombs. It was electronic rather than electromechanical. It was programmable rather than special purpose. It performed logical and statistical operations that anticipated modern computing. Yet its existence remained secret for 30 years after the war, and its contributions to computer science weren't recognized until historians uncovered the story in the 1970s. Tommy Flowers received little recognition during his lifetime. His engineering achievement in building Colossus was remarkable, yet it couldn't be acknowledged because of secrecy restrictions. After the war, Flowers returned to post office work, his wartime achievements known only to those with appropriate clearances. Only in his final years did Flowers receive public recognition for his contributions to computing. The intelligence derived from breaking Enigma and Lawrence, collectively codenamed Ultra, fundamentally changed how World War II was fought. Allied commanders possessed knowledge of German intentions, capabilities, and dispositions that would have seemed like magic to commanders in previous wars. The advantage was so great that protecting the source became as important as exploiting the intelligence. The Battle of the Atlantic demonstrated Ultra's value. German U-boats directed by encrypted radio signals were sinking. Allied merchant ships at unsustainable rates in 1941-1942, breaking naval Enigma allowed Allied naval commanders to route convoys around U-boat patrol lines, dramatically reducing losses. The impact was measurable. Convoy routes informed by Ultra suffered far fewer losses than routes selected without that intelligence. The intelligence advantage wasn't absolute. German naval Enigma went dark for periods when the Germans changed procedures or introduced new security measures. During these blackouts, convoy losses spiked dramatically. When brakes were re-established and Ultra resumed, losses fell. The correlation between reading German naval signals and convoy survival was unmistakable to those with access to the classified information. Ultra intelligence contributed to Allied success in North Africa. Rommel's supply convoys were targeted based on decrypted German shipping schedules. German defensive positions were known from decrypted situation reports. Allied commanders planned operations with knowledge of German strength and dispositions that gave them decisive advantages. Rommel himself reportedly said he felt like he was playing cards with his hand facing the wrong way. The D-Day invasion benefited enormously from Ultra. A strategic deception that convinced Germans the invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais was validated through decrypted messages showing German commanders believed the deception. Allied planners knew which German units were positioned where, knew when reinforcements were moving, and could adapt plans based on current intelligence about German deployments and intentions. But Ultra also created challenges. Using the intelligence without revealing its source required careful planning. If Allied forces consistently avoided German U-boats, German commanders might realize their communications were being read and change procedures. If Allied air raids always struck German convoys on specific routes, the pattern might reveal the intelligence source. Protecting the source sometimes meant accepting losses that could have been prevented. Strict procedures governed ultra-distribution. Only senior commanders were briefed on the source. Cover stories were prepared to explain how intelligence was obtained through other means. Sometimes reconnaissance flights were flown over targets that had already been located through ultra, providing plausible alternative explanations for the attacks that followed. The deception extended to Allied decision-making processes. Some historians argue that ultra shortened the European war by 2 years or more. The claim is difficult to prove definitively, but the intelligence advantage was undoubtedly substantial. Allied commanders made better decisions because they knew more about enemy capabilities and intentions. Operations succeeded that might have failed. Losses were avoided that might have occurred. The cumulative advantage over years of war was enormous. The ethical dimensions of ultra were complex. Decrypted messages sometimes revealed German atrocities, Holocaust operations, or other war crimes in progress. Taking action based on this intelligence might have revealed the source. The decision to protect ultra by not acting on some intelligence remains controversial. The choice between saving lives immediately versus maintaining the intelligence capability that might save more lives over time created impossible dilemmas. While British cryptanalysts worked to break German ciphers, German security officers worked to protect them. The Germans never fully realized Enigma was broken, but they weren't complacent about security. Throughout the war, they implemented security improvements that forced British cryptanalysts to adapt continuously. The Germans changed Enigma keys daily, ensuring that each day's messages required separate cryptanalysis. They distributed codebooks monthly that specified key settings for each day. Capturing these codebooks became a high priority for Allied intelligence. Several commando raids targeted German weather stations and naval vessels specifically to capture Enigma materials. The naval Enigma was particularly secure. It used a 4-rotor Enigma machine rather than the 3-rotor model. The additional rotor increased complexity by a factor of 26. When the Germans introduced the 4-rotor system in February 1942, naval Enigma went dark for Bletchley Park for 10 months. The blackout came at a critical phase of the Battle of the Atlantic, and convoy losses increased dramatically. The blackout ended when U-559 was sunk in the Mediterranean and British sailors boarded the sinking submarine to retrieve Enigma materials. 2 sailors, Lieutenant Anthony Fasson and able seaman Colin Grazier, drowned when the submarine sank while they were still inside retrieving documents. Their sacrifice provided the materials that allowed Bletchley Park to break 4-rotor naval Enigma. The intelligence they died obtaining saved thousands of other sailors' lives. German security improvements continued throughout the war. They modified plugboard procedures. They changed indicator systems for message settings. They introduced new rotors with different wiring. Each change forced Bletchley Park to adapt their techniques and sometimes required building new bombs with modified capabilities. The cryptanalytic battle was continuous. Some German officials suspected Enigma might be compromised. Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, periodically questioned whether the Allies were reading naval signals. German counterintelligence investigated. But German cryptographic experts repeatedly assured military commanders that Enigma was secure. The mathematical complexity seemed to preclude the possibility of cryptanalysis. The German confidence in Enigma's security was partially justified. The cipher was strong. Breaking it required enormous resources, brilliant cryptanalysts, sophisticated machines, industrial-scale operations, and continuous effort. No other nation except Britain and later the United States possessed the capability to break Enigma at the scale necessary for useful intelligence. The Germans weren't wrong to believe Enigma was secure against most adversaries. They simply didn't account for the extraordinary British effort. British security around Ultra was exceptional. The secret was held throughout the war despite thousands of people working at Bletchley Park and associated facilities. Compartmentalization ensured most workers knew only their specific tasks. Document security was strict. Communications were closely controlled. The culture of secrecy was so pervasive that it continued decades after the war ended. The Americans were brought into the ultra-secret after Pearl Harbor. Cooperation between British and American cryptanalysts expanded as the war progressed. American resources, particularly in manufacturing bombs and later in developing computer technology, supplemented British efforts. But the security requirements meant that even this cooperation was carefully controlled and compartmentalized. The contributions of Bletchley Park to Allied victory were substantial, though exact quantification is impossible. Ultra-intelligence informed decisions at every level of command across all theaters of war. The advantage of reading enemy communications while keeping friendly communications secure was decisive, in ways that shaped the entire conduct of the war. After the war, the British government maintained absolute secrecy about Bletchley Park operations. The Colossus machines were dismantled. The bombs were destroyed. Documents were classified. The people who worked at Bletchley Park were ordered never to discuss what they had done. The secrecy was so complete that even official histories of the war written in the 1950s and 1960s made no mention of ultra or cryptanalytic operations. The secrecy had consequences. Tommy Flower's pioneering work on Colossus couldn't be recognized or built upon. The engineering innovations that made Colossus possible were locked away. Computing development in the post-war years proceeded without knowledge of one of the most advanced computer projects of the 1940s. The historical record was distorted by omitting one of the most significant Allied achievements of the war. The secrecy began to break down in the 1970s when historians gained access to classified documents. Books about Bletchley Park and Ultra began appearing, revealing for the first time the full story of British cryptanalytic success. Alan Turing's contributions, previously known only for his theoretical work on computation, were revealed to include practical achievements that helped win the war. For the veterans of Bletchley Park, the revelation was bittersweet. Many had spent decades unable to discuss the most significant work of their lives. Some had taken their secrets to their graves. Those who survived to see the story revealed could finally talk about what they had accomplished, but recognition came late for contributions made decades earlier. Alan Turing's tragic story illustrated the human cost of the secrecy and the prejudices of the era. Turing was prosecuted in 1952 for homosexuality, then a crime in Britain. He was chemically castrated as an alternative to prison. In 1954, he died of cyanide poisoning, likely suicide. The man who contributed so significantly to Allied victory and to the foundations of computer science was persecuted by the society he had helped save. He received a posthumous royal pardon only in 2013, nearly 60 years after his death. The cryptanalytic techniques developed at Bletchley Park influenced post-war signals intelligence. The Government Communications Headquarters, GCHQ, Britain's Signals Intelligence Agency, directly descended from the government code and cipher school that ran Bletchley Park. Many Bletchley Park veterans continued their cryptanalytic work in the post-war period, applying lessons learned during the war to Cold War intelligence challenges. The computing legacy is equally significant. The theoretical foundations that Turing developed and the practical machines that Flowers and others built anticipated modern computing in multiple ways. The Colossus machines, though designed for a specific purpose, embodied principles of programmable electronic computing that would be essential to post-war computer development. Modern encryption faces challenges that descend directly from the Enigma story. The fundamental tension between making communications secure and breaking enemy communications remains. The recognition that machine ciphers require machine cryptanalysis led to computer-based cryptography and cryptanalysis. The arms race between encryption and cryptanalysis that characterized the Enigma battle continues in modern form with far more sophisticated technology. The story of Bletchley Park reminds us that brilliant individuals working in teams can achieve extraordinary things when properly organized and resourced. The combination of mathematical insight, engineering skill, organizational ability, and sheer determination that characterized Bletchley Park operations created capabilities that seemed impossible at the start of the war. The machines that British codebreakers built to outsmart Enigma represented a remarkable convergence of mathematical theory, engineering innovation, and practical necessity. The bombs and Colossus machines weren't computers in the modern sense, but they embodied computational principles that anticipated modern computing and demonstrated that machines could solve problems beyond human capabilities. The story is fundamentally about people solving problems. Turing, Welchman, Toot, Flowers, and thousands of others contributed insights and efforts that collectively created the cryptanalytic capability that broke Enigma and Lawrence. The diversity of skills: mathematics, linguistics, engineering, intelligence analysis, machine operation all contributed essential elements to the success. The achievement required industrial-scale operations. Building and operating hundreds of bombs and multiple Colossus machines demanded manufacturing capability, electrical power, maintenance expertise, and coordination across multiple facilities. The scale of operations reflected Britain's commitment to signals intelligence as a critical war-winning capability. The intelligence advantage that Ultra provided gave Allied commanders better information for decision-making. Better decisions led to more efficient operations, fewer losses, and ultimately quicker victory. The exact contribution can be debated, but that it was substantial is beyond question. The secrecy that surrounded Bletchley Park operations for 30 years after the war delayed recognition of one of the most significant Allied achievements.